Here we are filming a video on location at the Covent Garden Market in downtown London, Ontario. If you're new to London, I'd encourage you to visit it. Quite a variety of vendors here. These are all permanent installations. This is not like a farmer's market where they show up once a week. This is open Monday to Saturday, maybe Sundays as well. It's also a place where events are held. And this was built in the 90s on the site of a previous market which sat here for, I think, 40 years prior to that. So it's built in the late 20th century, so it's about 30 years in existence in its current form. Some of the vendors here were moved over from the previous market, but a lot of them are new. Just about everything available here. And I show you this just to remind ourselves of what we're actually focusing on when we're talking about macroeconomics. If you take what happens here and you multiply it by millions and billions and trillions, then the aggregate, what we call the aggregate of all that activity, is what we examine when we're talking about economics. That's a bit of an oversimplification, but I reserve that right because this course is full of oversimplifications, and we make them for the purpose of understanding just what we're talking about. So here's a way of viewing it. Now, the purpose of this video question, which was, how do I get an A in this course? And I would like to answer that question to the best of my ability. So I'm going to go and take a seat at one of these tables here on the mezzanine level of the Covent Garden Market, and I will give you my thoughts on that question. So this is an example of a question where a student has asked, and I consider it something that any number of students might be interested in. How do I get an A in this course? I've also added some comments about the outline of the course itself. So that's why I've called it Outline and How to Get an A. So I'm going to say that the first point I want to make about how to get an A in this or any course, I've just summarized it by saying attitude. I need to decide that there is a why to taking this course. I addressed the why in the last video that I made. You may have your own why. You know, if why is just, well, I'm required to take the course, then so be it. And you'll do what's required and hopefully you'll pass the course. But if you actually want to get an A and you actually want to take something from this course, you're going to have to put something into it. And that's going to be true of anything that you do in your life. What you put in is what you're going to get out. As much as I'm willing to put the time into understanding these things, what I'm going to try and get you to do is to understand some basic principles of this tired, obviously malfunctioning economic system that we have and apply it to some concrete analysis of the world around us. Because that's, in my view, a necessary skill in business. When my employer, the president of the company, I worked in a small business. Well, it wasn't that small, but it was a small business in global terms, where I got to work side by side with the owner and president of the company. And when we went to lunch, we didn't talk about, you know, the picnic we went on last week. We talked about the economic conditions surrounding us. With people that I meet today at Chamber of Commerce events, as I've gone into small business, I'm an entrepreneur, I go out to meet other entrepreneurs at Chamber of Commerce events. And what do we talk about? You know, there is small talk, but generally what people want to talk about is the economic conditions that are surrounding us. So we want to give you some basic economic literacy, and you're going to get as much out of it as you put in. And believe me, at some point, if you put absolutely nothing into this course and you just do the minimum and you get the minimum out of it, that is going to be reflected in the level of conversation you're capable of until you finally do get an economic education. So this is going to be a valuable part of your toolkit for socialization in the business world. if nothing else. Plus being able to forecast, plus being able to look at the conditions. Part of business is being able to look at conditions in the future and adapt to them in order to ensure the preservation of our revenue, and no undue escalation in our expenses, so that we can focus on profit. Again, that's what our economy is based on, and unfortunately that's the way it is. So you need to have some economic literacy for that. So attitude is number one, underlining it. And I would applaud the student who wrote to me and asked, because it's reflective of a good attitude that, I want to do well in this course, I want to succeed in this course. That to me is represented by getting an A, and I'd like to know what I need to do that. So I'm going to make some comments. First of all, there's attitude, and once that, then there's the set of tools that are available. Now, as part of this course, we have provided tools within FOL, and you're going to find your way very easily to the content, to the weekly modules, and the tools that are available in there. If you look at the publisher slides, for example, that are clearly labeled publisher slides, those provide a good summary of what's in each chapter. If you find yourself nodding off while reading through the actual text of the textbook, don't think you're alone. But you can pick up a lot of it by using the summaries in the PowerPoint slides. There are extra PowerPoint slides in there which seem to have been lashed together by other generations of professors. I've used them where applicable for some of my lectures in live situations, but between those two, you're going to get an adequate summary of what's considered important within the chapter. So that is another tool that's available to you, and various review questions, articles. Sometimes I will post videos in there. Some of them are longer than others. There's one I particularly like to put in the unit about economic growth, because it talks about the myth of infinite growth. We will, so feel free to poke around in those and decide what works for you. But do get curious about them. Do get curious about them, because it's designed in a way that there should be something for everyone there, if you want to learn this material. And then on the other side, you have purchased an access code for the Pearson site, which, in addition to needing to go in there to write your quizzes, which are counted as part of the grade in this course, you have a number of different resources available to you in there. I noticed flashcards. There might be some quizzes you can do for yourself, ungraded quizzes. The audiobook is located, or not the audiobook. I don't know if there's an audio version of the book. The digital copy of the textbook is in there. So fish around in there, see what turns out to be useful. I've started a thread which is called something like useful tools within macroeconomics, so that you as a student, if you find something that just really works for you, perhaps you would be generous enough to share that with the rest of the class so everyone can benefit. I'm hoping that that'll be a lively thread of discussion. I will leave it to the students. I will leave it to you. You're not graded on it, but I'll leave it to you. I found when I was going through school that peer support was the most important determinant of my success. I really encourage you, these people that you see around you in the class, or who are connected to this online class, if you're in the online version, those are your colleagues out in the business world. So get in the habit of reaching out to other colleagues, because when you reach out for help in your course, and you reach out to somebody else who is climbing up the mucky hill of studying it with you, you are helping them as well as them helping you. So you ask them a question. In answering the question, in providing you with their thoughts on that question, they are reinforcing it for themselves. So you're really studying by having that conversation. So let's feel free to do that. I'm not sure how much work I'm going to do with the forums within this course, but it's possible I can start some more on subject related. I just don't want to get too much into and I'm not going to be grading forums, because I don't want to get into the habit of subjectively grading your participation. I don't think that serves any purpose except to just stimulate people to throw out irrelevant comments without any kind of a foundation. We'll get to that part in a few minutes. But let's just say the next thing you want to do is make sure you're aware of the totality of the resources. And then the textbook is really a good guide for how to go through this material. The course is organized according to the chapters in the textbook. So have a look at that. There's a summary table of contents, and then there's a detailed table of contents that gives you the outline of what's discussed, and it breaks down the topics to some degree in point form. So let yourself get an idea. You're only focusing on chapters 1 through 12. So give yourself an idea of where the course is going. Get an idea of the shape of the course by looking at the table of contents. Now, another thing I would say is that Pearson has provided some great resources. This textbook is written, well, I mean, this is the 5th edition. I taught from the 4th edition during the winter. The only difference seems to be that they got rid of chapter 15 on international trade. Everything else is the same. We didn't do chapter 13, 14, 15 anyway. We're only doing 1 to 12. So if you wind up with a 4th edition copy, fine. This economic theory that we're dealing with has been rehashed and rehashed and rehashed, and it's what's kept basically led to the stagnation and the end of this empire over at least the last 50 years that I can speak for. It's I'm going to say it's tired and it doesn't work, but I'm going to say that I took this economic theory in the late 1980s and I've taken it during the 2010s, and I'm going to say that very little has changed in the root, and I lament that, but I'll leave it to you to make the judgment on it. But because of that, any of the terms that you read within the textbook or within your quizzes or anything that's causing you any consternation, yes, use Pearson. Yes, use FOL. Yes, use your peers. Yes, feel free to reach out to me anytime with course-related questions. But then check out other resources. There are lots of good resources online where if you were to search the topic comparative advantage, for example, you're going to find any number of instructional videos, articles, all kinds of things. You know, I like to look things up in Investopedia if I just want a quick definition. But if you want to search on a broader basis in order to find more information on any of the topics discussed here, as I said, these conversations have been rehashed and rehashed over the last half century at least, if not more. So there's plenty of material out there. So there's lots of help available for you as a student of macroeconomics. That's the good news for you. Okay, so to reiterate, we are talking about how to get an A in this course. And so obviously, from what I've said so far, the basis of it is having an attitude that you want to learn it. Number 2, being aware of what resources are available and using them to the best of your ability. And then number 3 is your quizzes and tests. So your quizzes within Pearson are due on approximately a weekly basis. I think it's on Monday nights that they close. You have 2 attempts at those. So on each one you have 2 attempts, and I would encourage you to use both of them, because each time is a review, which makes your test studying a lot more efficient in the end. But you can do as you please, but only your top of the 2 attempts is going to be graded to begin with, and then of all of those 12 quizzes, we're only going to take the top 10 to use as your grade for this course. So don't be afraid to just dive in. You know, maybe try the test at the beginning before you read the slides or read the chapter or whatever you decide to do. Take it once at the beginning, take it once at the end. There's there's very little risk to your first attempt at these quizzes, and it helps you to get over thinking you know what you don't. I think the purpose of granting 2 attempts on these quizzes is to understand that this is part of your study of macroeconomics, and that you're going to learn from each attempt. So take the quizzes seriously, and do the quizzes on a weekly basis. Essentially, you could call those low-hanging fruit and a study aid in and of themselves. So that's one way. Number 2, you're going to have 3 tests. There are 2 during the term, both held on a Friday, with the test opening in FOL at 8 a.m. and closing sometime deep in the night, sometime just before midnight, and you'll need about 70 minutes to do that. By the time you get to that, you will have done quizzes on each and every chapter. The first test is on chapters 1, 2, and 3, which are essentially review for you anyway. Then you've got your second test, and then there's a final exam that'll be scheduled during the exam period, and that'll be on chapters 4 through 12. So the latter part of the material will be tested on that time. By the time you get to the final exam, or by the time you get to the tests, I'm willing to bet that if you've come to the lectures and you've watched these videos, or a combination of the 2, you're going to be ready for your tests. So one way to get an A in this course, if that's your only goal, is to have a good attitude, be aware of the course resources, and get 100% on all your quizzes and tests, because that's basically worth 80% of your grade. So if you were to perfectly accomplish all of that, you would get your 80%, you would get your 80. You could not do anything else. But if you want to create some wiggle room for yourself, I would suggest doing the assignments that are part of this course, and that's worth 20% of your grade. Those are going to be reflections. Now, this video is already getting kind of long, so I'm not going to comment too much on the reflection. I'm going to make an entirely separate video on the reflections once I have all of the whys and wherefores worked out. I've got your deadlines for those in place. You may have noticed the submission boxes have already been constructed, but I haven't released the assignments or assigned deadlines to those yet. That is forthcoming, but that'll be the subject of a separate video. But I'm going to tell you in general that what those reflections are going to do are take what you've learned within the course and enable you to provide commentary on the things that you see around you in the world, in whatever form, as conveyed through various types of media. I'll ask you to select something to focus on and apply the tools that you're learning in this course, which, going back to that conversation I had with the president of the company at lunch, that's all we were really doing. So I'm trying to give you a little bit of practice in commenting intelligently on what's going on in the world around us, because that's really the skill that we're developing here. What we're doing is we're taking economics from being just a stale collection of theories and looking at the world around us and wondering what the world around us can tell us about the theories as much as what the theories can tell us about the world around us. So that's the kind of insight I'm going to be seeking when you're doing your reflections. I call them reflections rather than essays because I don't really want the level of formality represented by an essay. But make no mistake, I expect things to be cited properly, I expect them to be non-plagiarized, and I don't expect everybody to be handing in the same paper. And I expect any sources to be cited. If you say that the birth rate is going down, I want to know where you got that. And I'm not very generous with papers that I've seen where assertions are made, but there's no way of backing them up. So I am going to be rigid about that. But let's talk about that in a future video. So if you want to get an A in this course, use the materials provided, have a winning attitude, do all of your quizzes, do all of your tests, and then use the reflections as an opportunity to display what you've learned. And you should have no problem getting an A in this course without really spending a lot of time setting up and cramming for tests and cramming for exams. I don't want to see anyone doing that, so let's keep the conversation alive. The other thing you could do, and I'm just going to put this as the sort of the cherry on the cream puff of this whole video, is by participating in whatever we've got going here. If you're in the online section, by watching the series of videos, by getting involved in them, by interacting, writing back with any questions that you might have, getting involved in forums and discussing things. You know, if you're part of my live class, then show up at the lectures and bring your questions. Ask them, because it's not just all about you. The other person sitting in the seat next to you might be just too shy to ask the question, but have the same thing, and they may thank you afterwards in the hallway for asking that question. So let's bring up the discussions we have, and let's have a look at this together. We are going over this material together, and as I'm reminding you, I am reminding myself. So I'm growing from this too. So let's have fun with it. So that's how to get an A in this course. I hope I've helped to steer you along the right way. Everyone is going to be their own learner. Everybody has their own style of learning and of absorbing material. You'll notice I don't tell you how you're going to learn best. I just try to provide as many different options as I can for you, and you let me know what's working for you. Thanks.